With JD Martinez signed, do the New York Mets now have a lineup that is comparable to the Phillies, if not better? I'll break that down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Ever since the New York Mets signed JD Martinez, I've had this thought that was just lingering in my mind. How much better are the Phillies than the Mets at this stage? And particularly just offensively, because when we discuss these two rotations, it's clear who has the better team on paper come opening day. But the lineups here, can the Mets now slug with the Phillies? Can they be right there? And as soon as the signing went down and I was doing some research, I tweeted this out that night on, what was that? Thursday night. I tweeted out the Zips projections for the two lineups, where if you look at wins above replacement, the Mets starting 9 is projected to have 24.3 wins above replacement. The Phillies, 20.6. The Mets are projected to hit 17 more home runs, 167 compared to the Phillies at 150. And the Mets have 6 hitters who are projected to have a WRC plus of 100 or better. The Phillies have 4, which means the Phillies have 4 hitters who are projected to be at least league average. The Mets have 6. But just looking straight on projections does not tell the full story. So I've been looking at these two lineups and stacking them up head to head. And I figured, you know what? I'm going to do a show on it. I also want to do a show every day until opening day because, for one, Sunday is a big day for the show. I'll explain more tomorrow. And also, this Martinez signing has revitalized me a little bit. I'm fired up about this season. I want to keep talking Mets. So let's just go through this a little bit here. Let's look at the lineups. So I'll go 1 through 9 for the Phillies. Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Bryson Stott, Alec Bohm, Nick Castellanos, Brandon Marsh, Johan Rojas. Okay, it's a good lineup. Let's focus in on that 1 through 4. Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Realmuto. Stack that up against the Mets with now Nimmo, Lindor, Alonso, JD Martinez. Which group is better? Schwarber versus Nimmo. I would say Nimmo's the better hitter overall. If you want to compare DHs, Schwarber versus JD Martinez, it's an interesting conversation. Last year, Schwarber had 47 home runs. They were about even in RBI. Schwarber 104, Martinez 103. Martinez had 33 home runs. Here's the difference. JD Martinez played 47 less games than Kyle Schwarber, who played 160. If you look at Martinez's home run pace, at 33 home runs, 113 games, you have him play 160, he would have hit 47 home runs. He also outslugged Schwarber by 100 points because he hits for a much higher average, 75 points better. Meanwhile, Schwarber still gets on base more because he walks that much. Here's the thing. If you ask me right now, I could sign on a line and the Mets could now give JD Martinez to the Phillies and take Kyle Schwarber for this season. I take Schwarber because he's younger and I know he's going to play. Whereas with JD Martinez at 36, you got to be concerned about the health. But strictly on who's the better hitter, who's the more complete hitter, who's the hitter that's less prone to slumps, I think JD Martinez is right there. So I would call that even a wash. Trey Turner or Francisco Lindor. This is comparing shortstops. I like Lindor more. Always have, always will. 2 6-win seasons in a row. You know, Francisco Lindor stole 1 more base than Trey Turner last year. That's a reflection of how much Turner got on base, but still, it's pretty crazy. And Lindor is playing through a bum elbow. I think he could have an even better season this year. And I just trust him as a run producer more as well. So I like Lindor more. You go to Harper or Alonso. Now, Bryce Harper's a better player. He's a better hitter, of course. Pete Alonso has protection for the first time in his career, and he's in a contract year. I'm not saying that he's a better player than Bryce Harper, but would we be shocked if Pete Alonso put together the better offensive season? If Pete Alonso had 50 home runs while Harper had 33? I don't think it's crazy. And you want to have that conversation with Schwarber and Martinez when it comes to health, you could have the same one. Now, with Harper at first base. You'd hope the injuries are behind him, but Pete Alonso posts up every day. So again, it's not to say that I think Pete's better than Harper, but there is a conversation to be had. You go to the cleanup hitter. If it is JT Realmuto for the Phillies, and the Mets have JD Martinez, I already broke him down, so it would be the Nimmo if you're trying to compare the two, or let's just compare catchers. Realmuto versus Alvarez. Personally, I think Alvarez is going to have the better season. Now, Realmuto has the track record at just baseball where he ranked top 10 at each position. I think we had Realmuto ahead of Alvarez, but who would you bet on? The 33-year-old catcher that's in the middle of his big contract, or the kid who doesn't have his contract yet that's 22 years old, who is hungrier than ever? Who do you think was training harder this offseason, Francisco Alvarez or JT Realmuto? And Alvarez graded out better defensively last year. He was a full win better, actually 1.2 wins better than Realmuto last season in his first crack at it. Out-homered him. I think Alvarez is going to be better this year. You look at Stott, McNeil. Stott's coming off the much better season. McNeil has had a better season, 2022. The batting title win, about 6 wins above replacement. We'll see who's better this year, but I don't think that Stott is overwhelmingly better than Jeff McNeil. I think he's better right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if McNeil had the better season. You go to third base, Bohm or Beatty. Bohm's coming off 20 home runs, 97 RBIs. With that said, would I trade in a vacuum for just this year Alec Bohm for Brett Beatty? I don't think I would, because I think Beatty has more upside. Now, will that actually come to fruition this year? I don't know, but their projections are identical if you look at Zips. They're both projected to have a 1.7 F4. And home runs in line with each other. Beatty at 17, Bohm at 15. Average, they have Bohm hitting 270, Beatty 245. On base, they have Beatty a little bit behind there. 10 points less in both on base and in slug. Well, 15 points less on slug. But again, they have Beatty hitting more home runs, and they have their weighted runs created plus identical when it comes to Zips at 99. So, again, you give the edge to the Phillies, but I don't think it's crazy to think the Mets might have a better season at that position. Look at right field, Castellanos or Marte. Now, Castellanos had, 27 and 106 last year, 29 home runs, 106 runs driven in. Marte was hurt, didn't have a good year. I think Castellanos is the better hitter, but if you're looking at overall player and you're factoring in defense, I don't necessarily think that he is significantly better than Starling Marte. Then you look at Brandon Marsh. If you want to go back around to Marsh or Nimmo, it's no doubt who's the better player. Brandon Nimmo is definitely head and shoulders better than Marsh. And you go to center field. If it's a combination of Johan Rojas and Christian Pache, the Mets got Harrison Bader and Tyrone Taylor, who have significantly more experience. Pache and Rojas together don't even have 1,000 plate appearances in their career. They're actually less than 700 between the two of them. Taylor and Bader each have 3 double-digit home runs on their resume in their careers. And Bader looks good so far in camp. So I think the Mets have a better center field situation than the Phillies. You go to the bench, yes. The Phillies have the best bench player in Whit Merrifield among the two teams. But if you look at the collective, is Edmundo Sosa that much better than Joey Wendell? I'd say he's definitely a better defender. He's younger. But I don't know how, I don't know how many more wins he gives the Phillies as their backup utility infielder than Joey Wendell and Zach Short might. I don't think it's that crazy or that different. Like I said, Witt is the one, kind of big difference maker. But then again, Tyrone Taylor, if you compared him to Witt, I don't even know how much better Witt is than Tyrone Taylor. Probably, he's got the All-Stars and everything else. He's also 35 years old. And then the backup catcher, Nervias Stubbs. I just don't think that the Phillies bench is some overwhelming upgrade or overwhelming favor compared to the Mets bench. And then I look at the depth overall of these position player groups. Look at the Phillies' top 30 prospects, or even just focus in on their top 10. Where's the help coming from this year? Because you look at the Phillies system and they don't have a single prospect in their top 10 who's past high A, who has an ETA before 2026. Let's say Marte's not working out for the Mets. What's their option? What do? They can call up Drew Gilbert if he's hitting well and have a plug-and-play top 100 prospect in baseball that can go in and at least give you great defense if nothing else, but also can provide something with the bat. They have Jet Williams. They have Luis Angel Acuna. They got some guys. And they were more aggressive on bringing guys in on minor league deals too. So the Mets, with their overall depth, I think have the Phillies. And so again, I'm not saying the Mets are better than the Phillies today offensively, but I don't think in that one department, for the position players that they have on their roster compared to the position players the Mets have, that the Phillies are significantly better than the Mets. I think these two teams are very, very comparable. Now, that starting pitching, which we're going to get to in the final segment, that's where the Phillies have an edge. That's the area where the Mets have to really, lessen that gap. But I do believe that with great defense and a solid bullpen, they can mitigate that a pretty fair amount. And that's what I want to talk about next, comparing these teams defensively and the bullpens. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Also, don't forget, you got a little more time left to get into those preseason MLB futures. Look at the Mets over-under win total, 81.5. Pete Alonso's home runs at 41.5. You want to bet on the Mets to win the World Series at plus 5,000. You got to check and see if those odds have changed with JD Martinez. I can't imagine it moved the needle too much, but this is the time to check out the MLB futures. And again, you place a $5 bet on the tournament, you win that, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed to use on point spreads, money lines, and more. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, let's talk some defense here. The Phillies have finally gotten Kyle Schwarber out of the outfield, which is big. He's now their everyday DH, but Nick Castellanos is still playing right field. And I know Starling Marte did not have the best defensive metrics last year, but he was coming off the double groin surgery. He was not healthy. I believe he is healthy this year. And with that, the Mets have a much better right fielder than the Phillies do. Look at center field. I don't really think there's a big difference between Bader and Taylor and Rojas and Pache. You look at left field, Brandon Marsh compared to Brandon Nimmo. Again, I don't think there's anything drastic. When they decide to put the utility guy in the outfield with Merrifield or Jeff McNeil is a better fielder, but I don't think that Merrifield's going to kill them in left field either, or center, wherever they put him. But then you look at the infield, right? Shortstop, Trey Turner compared to Francisco Lindor. Here's where there is no doubt in my mind that the Mets are better. And I look at just up the middle defense. Yes, Bryson Stott is probably better than Jeff McNeil, but I don't think it's drastic. I look at the Mets up the middle with Lindor, McNeil, and when McNeil's not there because it's in the outfield, it's going to be Joey Wendell, who is very sound defensively. And even further down the line, if Luis Angel Acuna makes his way up or Jet Williams does, they're also great defenders. So up the middle defense for this season to have Lindor, McNeil, Bader, and Alvarez behind the dish. That is as good as it gets. And like I mentioned, Alvarez had a better defensive season than JT Realmuto last year. I think he showed up to camp, Alvarez did, looking drastically improved defensively on top of it. So when you look at it from that lens defensively, the Mets, to me, just look like a much better team. And I also look at the two head of baseball operations. David Stearns always prioritizes run prevention, particularly through his defense. Dave Dombrowski prioritizes run production with his offense. And so the Mets are going to be able to win some games within the margins that the Phillies just aren't. And it's not to say that Luis Severino is going to be a better pitcher than Aaron Nola this year as the number 2 starter for the Mets. But what I will say is last year, Aaron Nola, pitched to a 4.46 ERA and 193 and 2/3 innings pitch. I say, oh, that's because of, his own mistakes. Look at the numbers. Yes, for one, he did give up a little more home runs than he has in the past, but his expected ERA was 3.71. His expected fielding independent pitching was 3.63. But his ERA is 4.46 because his defense behind him was not very good. So by the end of this year, could Severino be pitching to a 3.5 with an expected ERA of 4.2, and Nola is pitching to a 4.2 with an expected ERA of 3.5, that could happen. Now, again, we'll get to the pitching more in the next segment. The difference is Nola and Wheeler are going to give you 180 plus innings each, which is massive. But it's just something to note. Even Zach Wheeler last year, he had a 3.61 ERA. His expected ERA was 3.18. So if that defense continues to be a problem, that's one area where the Mets can make that margin a little bit closer between the two teams, the pitching difference. They look at the bullpens. The Mets got Edwin Diaz back. And all of these different additions that they made this offseason, where you're seeing Austin Adams, Johan Ramirez. They had Sean Reed fully in-house, but he's having a great spring. Nate Lavender on his way from the minor leagues soon. He can have an impact. The Mets have a ton of arms, and they have a lot of depth in that bullpen, and they have the best closer in baseball atop it. The Phillies have Jose Alvarado. They have Jeff Hoffman, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Gregory Soto, Matt Strahm. It's not a bad bullpen, but again, there's something to be said about the overall depth the Mets have added this offseason. And when you look right at the top of that bullpen and you see Diaz compared to Alvarado, there's no question to me that the Mets have a better bullpen. So here's the thing. Let's just say the offenses are similar, but defensively the Mets are better and their bullpen's better. Is it crazy to think that by the end of the season, the Mets could win more games than the Phillies? I know all the prognosticators, national media outlets will call me crazy for this. And if there's any Phillies fans watching this, I'm sure you hate my guts, and that's fine because, hey, you're a Phillies fan. I hate you too. That's part of the relationship. But here we are looking at these teams, and I just don't see the gap that big. I think the gap between the Braves and the Phillies is a lot more than the gap between the Mets and the Phillies. That's how I see it. And the one area where we can look at and say, all right, Ryan, slow down, is the starting pitching. But I think even in that sense, the Mets do have some answers that could bridge that gap a little bit and make this a little more of an interesting conversation. I will also note that juggernaut Phillies team that is amazing in the playoffs, they won 90 games last year. They won 90. So are they all of a sudden a 100-win team? I don't know. We'll talk more about the pitching, though, in the next segment. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TVs. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes as well as free and live TV. What I love about the Fire TV stick, I can unplug that from my TV in the living room, bring it with me on the road. So in the hotel, I got my same setup right there. And Fire TV also recently added their Fire TV channels. Deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us at Locked On, plus most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more. If you want to check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices, head over to www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV to learn more. Again, that's www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTVs. Couple of little notes here that I haven't gotten a chance to get to, and I don't want to forget by the end of this show here. JD Martinez is going to start the year in the minor leagues. He has accepted a minor league stint to just get ramped up and ready. So Mark Vientos will make the opening day roster, probably starting on opening day, and he did hit a home run in his first at bat after the signing. So maybe that chip on his shoulder got a little bit bigger. We'll see when Martinez is ready what the Mets ultimately do with their roster, but for now, they've sort of kicked the can down there a little bit on that decision. Also, Kodai Senga is beginning to get ramped up here a little bit. I think he still has to get clear with the strength program to be able to get into his full throwing program. He has to show enough strength in that shoulder, but everything seems to be full go for him to come back at some point here. So as we now look at Senga and the Mets rotation, once you get in season and it's Senga, Quintana, Severino, Minaya, whoever's pitching the best out of Hauser, McGill, or Budo, the Mets are not competing with Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola and Ranger Suarez. They aren't. But if Severino's having a good season, Senga comes back, and Minaya or Quintana is good enough, or maybe both of them are pitching above their weight a little bit, all of a sudden, I think the Mets rotation can be a little bit better than people give it credit for. And when you look at depth, again, the Mets have so many options. The Phillies, it's Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Walker, and that's Taijuan Walker, and then Christopher Sanchez. Sanchez could be really good. Ranger Suarez can put together an even better year coming up over a full season. And Taijuan Walker has been pretty consistent. But with that said, you look beyond those guys at the depth that they have, and they got, Griff McGarry, they got Mick Abel. Those are guys that could pitch this year. If Andrew Painter was healthy, that would be a real nice option for them. But he got Tommy John last June or July. I can't remember the month, but somewhere in the middle of the year. I doubt he's ready for this season. So when you compare the Mets depth, where you're going to get Senga back, you already have Budo, so you have 6 MLB starting pitchers now. Then you add Senga, that's 7. David Peterson's going to come back too, that's 8. You have Christian Scott, who just showcased his stuff this past week. He looks really solid. Mike Vassal's close. Dom Hamill's close. The Mets have a lot of pitching depth. Now, their frontline depth is the issue. Maybe they go out and they get Jordan Montgomery because the prices are so low. And maybe Montgomery falls into the lap the same way that JD Martinez does. But even without him, I look at this Mets rotation, and I think it's good enough to hang into games. And if the lineup fires on all cylinders, and if the bullpen's great and the defense is great, there is a pathway to the Mets being a 90-win team now. I think before they had JD Martinez, I would have sort of capped it at being the third wild card team at 85, 86 wins. Some 4 or 5 games over 500 is the best I possibly would have said. But now that they added Martinez, I do think you could have a 90-win ball club, and maybe even one a little bit better than that. So I just would not be surprised if by the end of this season, these two teams really are head-to-head, neck and neck in that race. And if so, we'll see if both of them can sneak into the playoffs in that wild card, or if it really does come down to the two of them vying for one spot. But I think that is how significant the JD Martinez acquisition was. It narrowed that gap in a pretty significant way, because now I think the Mets offense is right there with anybody in the National League not named Dodgers or Braves. Anyway, that's how I see it. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As I mentioned earlier, tomorrow, a very special day for the show. So I will have a podcast to commemorate, and then we will go through a couple more preview shows next week with top 10 reasons to believe in the Mets, top 10 bold predictions I'll have on the Mets next season, any other breaking news that we'll have as we'll get closer and closer to opening day, a show every day. So make sure if you're listening on the audio side, you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Our next big goal here is to get to 9,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who are subscribing and getting us closer. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to Locked On Sports Today for the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.